tease everything into this. So when Steve and John asked us to kind of host a happy hour and lead sort of this talk, I mean, I thought it was kind of front and center, especially for our business. For those of you who were there last night and heard John Resig, one of the founders of the Chive and our head editor, kind of talk about like kind of the engagement that we try to create with the Chive brand, and actually like just be true to our audience and stand for something. It's no more relevant than today in kind of how we are kind of pivoting how we used to present our business to advertisers and how we're doing it today. And so, I'm going to get into it with everybody here on the panel here in a second, but just from our perspective, where, go back 3-4 years, where it was all about monthly active users, how large our reach is, where our audience is at, to now just driving pure engagement. And because that's the only way versus the platforms that we really can stand out and differentiate ourselves. So, from our perspective, great that we have 13 monthly active users on our O&O properties. Great that we have a social reach of 8 million, but what really drives engagement is, that our visitors are spending 191 minutes a month on our app. They're interacting. We're still one of the top 40 websites for discuss comments, so folks are actually engaging with the actual comment or the actual content and commenting with each other, and then they get out their credit cards. We've sold somewhere in the neighborhood of $175 million worth of T-shirts and other apparel over the last 7 years. We've raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 million for charity with Chive Charities and our 501c3. So, that story resonates with advertisers, that these are not just eyeballs; these are actually like real people, real community. That actually they get out there, they comment, they get out their credit cards, and actually, we I think have somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 Chive sponsored events on an annual basis. So. We can also get our audience off the couch. So that's what's really kind of resonated for us, over the last couple of years, as we've kind of like changed our story, changed our pitch, changed our, entire strategy around it. So with that said, enough about me. Do you want to introduce, our panel here, and we'll kind of let it just go down the line.
Hi, Annie Granatstein. I run the branded content studio at the Washington Post.
Pete Jacobs, I'm the Vice President of Integrated and Content Marketing for Digital Trends.
I'm Nick Johnson, I run sales at McClatchy.
Brian Szejka, I'm the publisher at Rolling Stone.
Great, so we'll start with Annie and kind of go down the line. Would love to really just hear for everybody just what the real, kind of elevator pitch is now for both your audience and for advertisers on how you guys are driving engagement.
Yeah, so for us, engagement is really all about creating content that's relevant to our audience, because if the content is relevant to them, then they'll engage with it more. So we do that by looking at the data, both about how our audience is behaving on our site, what articles they're reading, but also doing audience interest surveys. So really generating a lot of first-party data to us to kind of dive deep into who our audience is. And we think about that audience as having 3 segments: the consumer audience, the business audience, and the thought leader audience. And I've even divided my team by those segments. So the thought leader team really gets to know that audience, and the consumer team really gets to know that audience, and the business team really gets to know that audience. So it really is about kind of like having this very deep knowledge and using that to inform the topics that we're choosing to write about for advertisers to reach that audience, but also how we're distributing to that audience and the types of storytelling methods that we're taking.
Oh, great. For us, a lot of what we're focused on right now is just how do we incite people to take action, to take one more step, whether it's on our site or pushing them over to a shopping cart on a given e-commerce partner, and really trying to intuit kind of what they need or what they mean when they ask, if they come through a certain query or by searching for certain products. really just trying to understand like kind of where they are in their path to purchase or in their trying to figure out kind of what's broken and how to fix it and what we can put in front of them that's going to help and you know, be a real solution provider to them. And so you know, like Annie said, we're looking at a lot of data on kind of just the overall demographics and figure out the life stage where they are, and then you know, how then from a product perspective, you know, that affects them and the differences between someone at 25 looking for their first TV and someone at, you know, 45 looking to totally wire their home to be fully smart.
So we're basically like 30 Washington Post lights, like small versions of Washington Post in 30 different markets with 30 different mastheads. And so our challenge is unique in the sense that we are uniquely local. We've been in these markets for a really long time. We have readers of our newspaper that have grown up with generations with our mastheads. So the advertising value proposition is strong impact locally. But at the same time, with 30 newspapers across the country, we've actually got some scale. So over the last year, we've built out a national digital sales team. In terms of sort of the value proposition, we're a legacy media company that's trying very, very hard to become digital and contemporary very quickly. And so on the very basic end of our business, it's highly, highly transactional, classifieds, obits. I never thought in my entire life I'd ever sit on a stage talking about obituaries, but sadly that's part of our business. And on the big side of it is, you know, we've got a number of multi-million-dollar advertisers activating locally with our full-service digital agency Accelerate, which brings full digital services to advertisers, multi-dealership networks and things like that, big CBD, casinos, hospital services, things like that. So from SEO, SEM, geofencing, audience extension, website development, branded content, bringing these services to local advertisers that have big ambitions in their regions.
And the Rolling Stone story is probably a little different. You know, with 50 years of some of the biggest interviews, stories, groundbreaking journalism, we look at engagement more with our editorial. And we have the data behind it. We have the capacity to create branded content like what Annie's working on as well. But on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, we look at how Rolling Stone headlines are driving engagement not only on our own platforms, but across all of media. Recently, we dropped the Taylor Swift cover on Instagram, and I think it did 1.6 billion press impressions in the 72 hours following release. And then we look at what that converts to on our site and how much time people are spending with that content. Our team has a good idea of how long it might take to read an entire article. And when things like Taylor Swift are trending, our edit team is jumping out of their seats and they're like, holy shit, people are reading the entire thing. You know, they're spending 10 or 12 or 15 minutes on the site with a single article. So we have those kind of major news breaking moments throughout the year where we have a huge cover story. We do an interview. We have Sean Penn interviewing El Chapo via burner phones in a cave in Mexico that leads to an FBI arrest and things like that are really great. But then we try to, you know, maintain that momentum with our audience throughout the year by peppering in lists, definitive things like the 100 greatest singers or 500 greatest guitarists, and then you know, continuing to evolve with creative content tentpoles, looking at what has resonated with our fans in the past and making sure that in between those big moments we're bringing things to life that are going to drive interest across, you know, different genres, whether it's music, politics, TV and entertainment, and then, you know, how that performs on different platforms and ensuring that we're growing not only in the digital space, but we're leveraging social platforms and we're giving that something that is additive to our fans' interests in all the places that they're consuming Rolling Stone content and extending into streaming and growing even, you know, what we have from a written standpoint into, you know, short form documentaries that live on OTT platforms or partnering with studios to bring something like the El Chapo interview to life with Facebook Watch, you know, to continuing engaging on more platforms.
Yeah, maybe undersold that a little bit. I mean, we just won a Pulitzer for breaking the Epstein story wide open, and very proud of busting Robert Kraft for the rub and tug incident down in Miami. So, you know, we're happy to break news, and journalism is the core of everything we do as well.
Perfect. From Robert Kraft, Annie, to you know, just where, you mentioned how you've segmented your audience, in order to drive content, and just maybe talk to us a bit about, the role that first-party data and your business insights team is kind of creating or is playing in how you create content.
Yeah, so we have the Washington Post Research and Insights team, and I think the team you're referring to. So it's the same team that does all the surveys and polling for the newsroom. So we're very lucky to be able to tap into them because they really are like the best at doing this kind of work. What we'll do is we'll feed them hundreds of different topics. And then they'll seed those out to thousands of Washington Post readers, and they'll have them rank the topics on a scale of 1 to 9 level of interest. And then we'll look at which topics are getting 8s and 9s kind of across the board, and that's where we know to lean into for advertisers. But we'll also marry that with the first-party data of how things are performing, similar to what Brian was just talking about on our site. We'll look at what's spiking, what's really popular, and kind of marry that with the interest data. So it really is kind of like looking at these two feeds to come up with the right topics.
So then taking that step from, driving towards more, engagement, interaction from a content perspective, what sort of metrics are resonating with advertisers?
I think from an engagement standpoint, they're obviously looking at time spent on articles and video completion rates on videos. I do think there is a trend towards wanting more down funnel kind of metrics, and we've actually started to create shoppable content kind of in response to that, and also retargeting campaigns. So what that means is that we'll, the audience that engages with the article content that we create, we then retarget them with more traditional display advertising and kind of move them down the funnel towards, a point of purchase or towards the client's site.
Yeah. Pete, so just for folks in the rooms who aren't familiar with digital trends, do you maybe want to just take a step back and talk about your current go-to-market strategy for, and business model for what you guys are driving?
Yeah, sure. We're the leading independent tech site out there. Probably, 30 million uniques a month come through our site, and big emphasis over the last year on e-commerce, driving people to whether it's an Amazon or a Walmart or Best Buy, and we'll move roughly $95 million worth of product through our site over, the kind of rolling 12-month period here. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So in a very direct response sort of world, how much of that is influencing your content strategy and what you guys are looking to do?
It's a big part of it. I think more than anything, it's just serving an audience. We are, I don't think we're going to win a Pulitzer anytime soon for our review of an OLED TV, but we're filling a need for people. We're a utility largely, but we are serving our audience in a way that is still very human and trying to give them the experience of what technology brings. Every company that we talk to, from Serta mattresses to Ford now says they're a technology company or a mobility company or kind of anything other than the product that they are. So from a content perspective, our job is to kind of distill what all of that means to them, and then how that will still manifest itself through an actual human experience with technology.
So I'm going to give the tweet version of Digital Trends because it's a kick-ass site that probably most people in this room haven't heard of. It's really Consumer Reports for the millennial audience, except Consumer Reports is sleepy and boring and Digital Trends is not. So, if you've not spent time on it and you care about a millennial audience, it really is a badass site that you probably have not spent a lot of time on, but it's a killer brand.
Thanks. You're a way better marketer for my site than I am. I might have just put me out of a job here, but I appreciate
that.
The
That's in the public domain. You can just cut that and use that at the next panel you do.
Perfect.
You've launched a new live daily show, Digital Trends, right?
Yeah, we.
As a part of that larger picture, tell us about how that's
Yeah, we launched Digital Trends Live just a year ago. And really what it is it's just a daily conversation with our most loyal audience about just what we said about the experience of technology and how it's kind of shaping our lives on a daily basis. It gives us a little more elbow room to really kind of show the human side of who we are, because it's hard sometimes for that to come through when we're talking about tech companies or specific products. And we really think that humanness or humanization of tech is really what sets us apart. So having our editorial staff be able to come on every morning, talk about what they're working on, talk about what's happening in the news or on the site, kind of spilled coffee and mess ups and, you know, everything that comes with live TV. You know, we look at that as part of the attraction over something, you know, super polished. And really what it came out of for us was this: we saw a lot of publishers in our space, you know, quote unquote, pivot to video over the last few years. It was something that as an independent publisher, it was an arms race. We just knew we couldn't win anyway. And so live, really from an investment standpoint, made a lot of sense for us. And then from an ability to differentiate ourselves, also was really attractive to us. And so, yeah, we're across 10, 15 different distribution partners. We do about 10 million views a month on our live content. When we go to events like CES or Samsung Unpacked or a SpaceX launch, you know, we'll see 75,000, 100,000 people join us, and then it's a, you know, a little bit of a party for us. It's a conversation with that audience, and it gives us a lot of feedback on kind of what they like. They're very vocal, obviously, about what they don't like, and yeah, it's been a great success for us.
So Nick, so you mentioned, you know, you do have some, you know, kind of larger, you know, more national advertisers, but a lot of your business is driven by, you know, the SMB market. Yep. So talk to us a bit about how you convince those folks to advertise with you versus, you know, the self-serve platforms that, you know, Jim mentions. Yeah,
I mean, it's funny. Having spent a lot of time as a digital guy in TV companies, I never necessarily thought I'd find myself in this space. But it's interesting because local, I feel like, is a different animal, and self-serve is obviously a real thing, and there's a lot going on there. But I also think at the same time it can be impersonal and tough to navigate. So a lot of our clients are obviously coming to digital and trying to figure it out, but they don't have the horsepower necessarily to be really, really good at it. And so I think part of our value propositions is to sort of be an intermediary in serving the role of what a traditional agency would be for a Fortune 500 marketer, and bringing on those skills and the capabilities that allow them to leverage new technology and new services to do a better job of driving business their way. And for us, it's a pretty good place to be, because it's, as Andre, who's sitting in the audience, who runs the agency, it's very sticky. So the switching cost is high. So if we have a really good relationship with a 10 top auto dealer and we're doing real business for them, it's hard to switch pitch us out, because they know the people that run their business. We're on location with them. We're shooting video for them. And it complements our sort of owned and operated hardworking media. At the same time, our challenge and / opportunity is that we are a very legacy-oriented business, and we still sell a lot of print. That's like selling a lot of carriages in a world where there's a car. And so we're trying to figure out how to get ourselves out of that business as quickly as possible and pivot to digital. So letting people understand the value and bringing them on board is really where all of our future focus is invested. That's great. And then I think one of the topics I do want to talk about as well then is as you provide that like next level of service for these clients, how do you do it in a cost-effective manner, both while you're trying to make this pivot and manage the you know, the actual print infrastructure that exists for your business. So, you know, on one hand, there's a lot that's happening around just trying to make the publishing side of our business more efficient, which thankfully I spend zero time thinking about. That's for people that understand that side of the business to focus on. So the opportunity that I've had in coming in is that we have a 164-year-old company that you know has arrived at digital like 25 years late. So I walk in looking like a sorcerer or a wizard with all this fancy talk about what the future should look like. They're like, wow, that's amazing. And what I'm working through is basically a 2-year restructure of our sales organization. We are really tethered and bound by our structure that was governed by how we did business for a long time. So we have resources in a lot of places. We had very sort of old school sales structures that were very market focused. And the first wave of sort of structural change was to move from sort of 4 or 5 different sort of sales functions in 30 different markets that were compensated differently with different priorities depending on who the publisher in that market was, to centralizing structure. So we went from having 30 publishers that ran sales to 5 functional channel leaders. So I have a national digital sales team, a strategic sales team, a local sales team, a legacy group called Key Accounts, which basically does print deals across regions, and then our call center. And so once we sort of moved to that structure, now you start seeing that it's really more important to think about sort of resource allocation based on opportunity than by geography. And so we're kind of just trying to figure out how to continue to evolve that structure, as well as making sure that everybody in sales understands what the priority is. And there's 2 of them. One is we're working really, really hard to make sure that we have a stabilized operating cash flow for the company. And number 2 is double-digit digital growth, period. And so, you could not push that through 2 years ago because you had 30 publishers that looked at their business 30 different ways. And so you could mandate a priority, but that didn't mean it was absorbed into the markets. And now the priorities are very clear, and it's much easier to manage.
Yeah, great. Brian, so for Rolling Stone, how does Rolling Stone win share of attention in this world where everybody is clamoring to grab?
It's challenging, and as a mid-sized publisher, it's really a focus on quality. It's something that we talk about daily in the office, and it is about creating a quality premium piece of editorial that is going to resonate with our consumers. And we have a great idea of what differentiates our consumer in the marketplace, and we're constantly using learnings on what they've interacted with in the past, where we see trends and spikes in terms of traffic in the video space, the social space, to try to deliver something that is going to resonate digitally, socially, and be something that people come back to. When we talk about traffic patterns and things, and you talk about growth in terms of bringing in new users, it is constantly ensuring that our content approach is resonating with the ever-changing Google algorithms. We were reliant for a long time on kind of our evergreen content, things like lists and historical articles and galleries that would come up regularly in Google searches, and those all of a sudden in March of this year were deprioritized. So it causes us to have to take a massive shift in how we're using our platforms to bring audiences in. So when Google deprioritizes something, how do we leverage our social platform to re-promote that content around relevant, trending pieces? If Billie Eilish is performing on Saturday Night Live, what are we doing on our own channels to re-promote editorial, to re-promote a cover story, to push out a cover shoot in the social space that's going to capitalize on those trending moments where we've been deprioritized as a mid-sized publisher in the larger algorithms.
What's the one metric, Brian, that convinces advertisers to spend with you versus Facebook, Google, et cetera?
It's time spent. For us, primarily. So we have long-form articles, we have long-form lists, and when we put the opportunity to own Rolling Stone, edit and put your brand adjacent to either an article or a content feature or a video series that people are going to spend 6 or 7 or 8 minutes with, that's really the value sell for us. We acknowledge that lower funnel is really a key for brand advertisers, and a ton of dollars are being pushed down the funnel to directly to acquisition, directly to purchase. And, our conversation is around awareness, it's around brand building, it's around, elevating people's perception of your brand via time spent and association with our content.
Great. And then Annie, similar sort of question, but what's your advice for the audience just on how you win versus Facebook, how you win versus spend with Google?
So for us, I think a lot of it has to do with that qualified Washington Post audience. So, for the branded content that we're creating, the majority of our traffic is coming from on-site, like on Washington Post channel traffic drivers, as opposed to social media traffic drivers. And I think this is quite different from a lot of other media companies, and I think it can be attributed to a lot of what I was talking about before, because we're making sure that those headlines on Washington Post channels, are going to appeal to the audience that the advertiser is trying to reach. So we have higher click-through rates, and we're really able to reach that exact person that the advertiser is trying to reach through very sophisticated distribution technology, very sophisticated contextual targeting, meaning that the headline's placed in a contextually relevant article. So all those things, help us reach kind of that needle in a haystack audience that the advertiser is trying to reach, I think, in a very sophisticated way in comparison with our competition and even with Facebook.
Well, yeah, and I think the thing that's really envious about Washington Post is they have a pretty awesome owner. Only one of us is like, a cousin to a FANG company, and you look at the work that Jared Dicker's doing with Zeus and the platform innovation that's happening there. You've got a great brand, but you've got a killer sort of dev team sitting underneath that unlocks, I think, a huge amount of advertiser value. At the end of the day, you still need a great editorial and news product, but holy shit, the dev resource that sits in that organization is pretty sick.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Another 30-second commercial. I get paid in beer late at night.
Yeah, because I think, as far as like I look across all four of these businesses, that are producing just some amazing content and have, just strong core audiences. In the ever-changing media landscape, one of the difficulties about running these types of businesses is that you need to evolve the monetization and the OpEx structure to constantly pivot to how these audiences come.
Right. Well, and I think that conversation that Steve had prior to the conference is, if you're a legacy company where there's tremendous pressure on the expense side of the business, how do you pivot between running your we obviously don't want to turn off our legacy business, even though it's expensive. And there's legislation in California that actually hurts our ability to deliver newspapers because Uber and Lyft are so successful, and the unionizing, I've just went over my skis on the legal aspects of that. It's just a problem. But at the same time, you watch what Jared's doing, and you're like, these guys have the ability and the infrastructure and the investment to manage our legacy business while leaning super aggressively into platform and future state. And so I think that's the trick for many of us. I'm sure it feels the same at Rolling Stone. What an iconic brand that I grew up on. All you need to do is publish 52 times a year with Taylor Swift on the cover, and I think you just solved your problem. But that's a hard thing to manage, and that's what I think makes all of our jobs so interesting, is that it really is a balancing act.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so Pete, just knowing the fact that you don't have Jeff Bezos's checkbook to help drive your strategy, but what has you most excited and bullish about being an independent mid-sized publisher?
Well, it just gives us a lot of freedom, and it's pretty liberating in a lot of ways to we don't have to chase every single thing that comes along. So it gives us a freedom to, the way we prove out what we're gonna kind of invest in and spend our time and energy on, you have to kind of prove it first before the company kind of gets behind it. But as an independent publisher, then once we make a kind of decision as an exec team that this is where we're going to go, you get the support and the kind of resources of the entire company poured into it. So as we look to say, like, hey, e-commerce is going to be a real priority for us over the next year, and we're going to hire we hired Linda Mann away from New York Times and Wirecutter to come in and lead, help her grow a team. And every department from dev, editorial, my team on the integrated marketing side, like, you get this feeling of kind of, okay, what can we do to help you then be successful? And it just you get the best out of kind of what everyone has to offer, even though it might not be the totally off-the-shelf solution, where in a lot of ways it would have been a lot easier to just like kind of throw money at it, hire the, you know, whatever software and people are out there. That kind of more homemade, homegrown feel. We learn a lot more along the way, and I think as a result, then the successes feel just that much more special, and you get to see the result of your work kind of on a daily basis compared to, you know, my time at like Viacom or Univision, where you were just kind of like, you know, shoveling coal a little bit into to keep the furnace going.
Nick, similar sort of question. You know, so what in a world where all the dollars seem to be pivoting into and moving to the platforms, you know, what has you most bullish about your business and your space?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that keeps me hopeful and optimistic is I do think that sort of that high local touch is an opportunity. I mean, you look at what's happened with sort of Mighty Hive in this move towards migrating agency services to clients directly. Really, that's what we do with Accelerate, is really a white label agency for customers or clients that you know may have been underserved or are sort of late to understanding digital. And you know, we have I don't know, you know, 6 or 7 really significant advertisers that push a lot of business through us. And I think that it was deliberate and also sort of a byproduct of the right geography. And I think that's something that we can pretty easily scale with the right focus and the right people. And I think when we launched the agency, we launched it in a way that was before my time, but the idea was let's create sort of a startup that we let be free and be on its own so we don't break it with legacy. And when I got to the company, it became really apparent to me that it was time to pull that closer, and our strategic team, which is focusing on larger deals, needed to really lean into that. And we brought in a leader who is a digital native that understands those services and products and understands digital at a very senior and experienced level, who can lead his team into leaning more into that agency. So I think that's a differentiator for us. And I think that now that we look at our 30 independent children as one scalable entity, that unlocks value as well, and we put a team against that.
Great. And then Brian, similar question as well. What has you most bullish about Rolling Stone's future?
I think, you know, it's fun, right? We talk a lot about data, and the massive platforms have overanalyzed everything to the point that all decisions are being made via an Excel spreadsheet or a data chart or a graph or a trend in numbers. But everyone got into advertising and everyone got into publishing and marketing because it was fun and because you're really able to do things that people want to talk about and consumers want to engage with, and you're proud to, you know, to share with friends and colleagues at the end of the day. And Rolling Stone, I think, is uniquely positioned where when brands have an opportunity to launch a new product or to break off a piece of opportunistic budget to do something that is not so lower funnel driven, but really brings the fun and the heart and the passion back into it, they come to a brand like Rolling Stone because they want to align with an authoritative publisher who has access to artists, who is, historically is in the green rooms and on tour buses and in hotel rooms conducting interviews that no one else can get. And when brands, get out of kind of that really data-driven mindset for just a second and want to align with bring a new video series to life or run a documentary with Rolling Stone or put their brand next to the biggest names in entertainment or culture or politics, we are the first brand that comes to mind. And that's what keeps things exciting, and it allows us to keep evolving and push our content out into new places and work with Imagine and Ron Howard to create a new documentary series and talk with Amazon and Hulu and Spotify about creating podcasts and video series that bring the Rolling Stone voice to life in these new places, because it's something that people want to consume and want to be aligned with.
And then Annie, so I know we've kind of talked a lot about in this world where it's going head to head against the trillions of market cap and the platforms. Absent of them, how in a world where they didn't exist, how would you look to invest and grow the Washington Post business?
From my point of view, and again, I run the content studio, so it's a certain perspective that I bring. I think that we're in an era, I think someone else was talking about, like, brands don't want to talk about their products, right? They're like anything but. I think that that's like only an increasing trend. And if you look at the Business Roundtable announcement from a few weeks ago, about how brands have to have a higher purpose, can't just be about product and profit. I think that the Washington Post becomes a very important place for brands to get that kind of thought leadership message across. That's kind of like the sweet spot or the heart of what we do in the studio, but also what advertisers are doing with us with larger partnerships across the Washington Post. And that's consumer brands and B2B brands and kind of every brand, because they're getting that sort of halo effect of the Washington Post, like award-winning, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative thing, but also a team that has expertise in how you leverage that for a brand's message. So I think that that's something that we are really like thinking about. How do we talk about that more and get that message across that the Post is the place to do that kind of thought leadership in a meaningful way?
Great. Do you want to open it up?
Yeah,
for
we have time for questions. We have 4 different very different media brands that are thinking about engagement for very different audiences. What are your questions?
Yeah, sure. Hi, guys. Chris Moore from Publishers Clearinghouse. I think someone mentioned engagement or brands were interested in CTR. Is that really true? It's hard to believe at this point. And this is open for anybody.
I did not say that.
It might have been me, maybe. I think what I meant was that since we're engaging a majority. So basically, like our traffic is coming from majority from on-site traffic drivers, and as opposed to social media. I think what's important there for advertisers as they think about engagement is who are they engaging, right? So as opposed to it being this, paid approach across Facebook, et cetera, they can know that with us, they are actually engaging that Washington Post reader, and with our very sophisticated targeting, a specific kind of reader that they want to reach.
And just to jump on top of that, I mean, we're really trying to change our pitch and our conversations with everybody, from this is our scale, this is our reach, and the conversation on on direct response or ROAS. We're changing that conversation to these are the types of folks, segmenting these types of audience, how they over-index, how they relate to your brand, and then they are engaged, they're commenting, they're spending money, time on site. It really is not just a pure audience impression scale. It is, this is what they are actually doing when they actually get there.
But at the same time, as Annie, you mentioned more interest in that lower part of the funnel. Pete, you mentioned you've got Linda Mann from Wirecutter, who's now with you and is doing the affiliate program, which is going to be gauged by pure performance. I'm curious about how these two blend. Seeking this greater brand engagement at the top end, and yet at the same time, a lot of business models also at the same time being driven lower down into the funnel, especially through affiliate relationships.
Yeah, it really is like the flip side of the coin, and we're seeing it go in both directions. So, like I was saying, with these thought leadership kind of campaigns, which are a large portion of what we do, that really is about changing perception of a brand, very upper funnel. But then we're also doing these campaigns, especially with consumer brands, with B2B as well, where they really want to see it ultimately lead to conversions. And then we're doing those retargeting campaigns, and we're doing shoppable content. So it's kind of like a barbell or something going in these two very opposite directions.
Pete, is it a barbell for you? Because I'm curious, at some point, there's got to be a collision between those two, because you're going to start seeing what's most profitable to do with your content, drive people down to the lower funnel where you can convert them into buyers, or try to aim for those bigger brand buys.
I think they all kind of work together, and I think, as Jim said in his talk, what we're seeing is way more of those kind of client direct conversations, and even at the agency level, I think there's a little bit of a kind of moment of clarity there, that these campaigns, for the sake of click-through or viewability or kind of all of these other things that don't really serve kind of pushing the client or the company forward are we're starting to see a little bit of a change there. So I think now what that allows you to do is have a conversation about showing how all of the different components of a given publisher can work, or even a campaign in total. We're not, for our size and scale, we know we're not going to be like a one-stop thing for everyone. And I think that, again, gives us the opportunity to go in and say, like, well, what's the kind of pain point for you in that path to purchase, or what's the kind of bigger issue you're trying to solve? And it lets us use all the components of what we have to offer to kind of go after it. So I think it's only a problem if people find that like their little segment of the advertising universe is in jeopardy because they're only solving like one side of they only have one note to play. But I think if you can start to have those conversations about like what really a client's trying to do, it shouldn't cause any conflict.
Well, it could be an advantage, right? I mean, in the sense that if you're dealing with a Samsung, as some of these brands start amping up their direct-to-consumer channel, then it becomes a more natural conversation between their branding and their performance, because they're actually engaged in the full funnel digitally. So that lets you play into that.
Yeah, and I think what everyone's kind of dancing around, or like the idea of digital, I think, has started also to change back to this understanding that there's got to be a real human action at the other end of whatever we're doing. And I think, again, for a long time in digital, there was this like kind of myth that it was, just unlimited impressions and clicks, and but there's still a finite amount of people in the world that are interested in a given thing at any given time. And I feel like we're starting to have those conversations again as well. That's like, there's only so many people that can do so many things.
Andy Weedland, I want to follow up on something Annie said about you have your editors involved, and what you do is you send a bunch of topics, and then they send out a survey, and they weirdly rank it 1 through 9. I don't know why you don't go to 10, but that's a weird thing. But it just seems to me, it's a question for the panel about the balance when you're creating branded content between data-driven and creative. And the awesome thing about news is that every day it's new. And so I'm a little surprised that you would use data to determine what might be interesting, because in a day or two, that data may be stale. But an editor, or a creative editor, or someone like you, Annie, who is working with the brand and feels what the brand attributes are, you can come up with a great idea that may be like real and temporal and relevant in real time, more than what data might tell you, because data will get stale really quickly.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a balancing act, definitely. I would say that for most of the programs that we create, it's not the same as hard news, in the sense that we are not, the Washington Post newsroom is publishing 600 pieces of content a day, right? We are taking weeks, or maybe even sometimes months, to create, highly interactive, multimedia articles and videos that tend to be a bit more evergreen, but they still need to be relevant. So it's a dance, I think. We're looking at data from things like those audience interest surveys that you were just talking about, and performance data that changes day by day, obviously. But we're also looking at larger cultural insights. So we actually have like a framework we developed where we look at a cultural insight, or more than one, about what's going on right now out there in culture among this target audience. And then we look at an editorial insight, or more than one, that's coming from those audience interest surveys and from performance data on site, and marry those two insights, right? And this is definitely a creative process, marrying those, reaching the right conclusion in order to drive the brand's messaging. So it is very much a marriage of science and creative.
That was said way more articulately than I could say it, so I'll give you Nick's like 101 for branded content in a news environment. I mean, I think that the value that we bring as a whatever publisher it is, obviously, is that if we can create a piece of work for you that feels authentic to our consumers in our environment, but is not editorially sort of out of whack and out of alignment with what our editors want, then we've done a pretty good job. And so, like, at the end of the day, what I'll try to represent, or my team will try to represent, is what is the ethos of our property, but let's embargo that content in a way that nobody mistakes it for news, but it feels appropriate in its place, that's relevant to what the people came to our sites for, but is authentic and makes the brand the hero in the middle of it. Like that, I would never ask an editorial, I would never ask Kristen Roberts like for approval on a piece, because I think it's separate enough from the news, but we know what feels right, and it's obviously it's put in a place. It's clear that it's sponsored, but it feels authentic. Right. Yeah. That's the critical thing. Is it has to be in line with what they came to us for.
Hi. Excuse me. Hi, Andy from Stack. You guys touched a little bit on the needs of advertisers earlier. Can you talk a little bit more about local, regional, and national advertisers as it relates to their desire for engagement?
So I'll take a shot at that one since we kind of are up and down. For us, national advertising is the whole premise in launching our national advertising team was that we had a pretty strong programmatic business, which was all happening in an open exchange, which meant that we were devaluing our inventory, and so we wanted to have a direct relationship with advertisers. At this stage of the game, it's really stitching the 30 properties together, leveraging that audience, and scaling it up for an advertiser. And so the example I would give you is in 2018, we had a big box retailer that was doing low six figures with us. Built a national team, had a relationship with the agency, had a relationship with the brand. We 14x that business. So having a national sales team talking about the value of our audience and letting them know there's a million reasons why they're not getting their value out of the open exchange, it turns into results. On the far end of the spectrum is hyperlocal, very, very transactional. And the middle is the white glove, sort of high touch service for brands that have 6 to 7 figures to spend with us. And so the way we really break that down is a combination of owned and operated media, sponsorship, all the things that you might think, as well as branded content. So in Miami right now, we're working on a pretty big deal with one of the local casinos, and that's everything from branded content to literally an out-of-home art project in downtown Miami to ads in the newspaper to ownership on our owned and operated. So I think it's typically a very, very transactional business, but by having agency services and sort of thinking outside of just buying half a page and bringing solutions to them, there's a pretty good sweet spot of places that we play that for many, many years, we were not bringing solutions, and now we're moving from transactional to solutions.
Mike and panel, we're gonna move this into a roundtable at the end of the morning. Thank you very much. That was really, really helpful.